The safe was open. Stacks of cash lay like neatly cut bricks under the lamplight, bands around them glinting as if they were jewelry. Ethan Caldwell didn't move. He kept his breathing slow and even his head slumped against the leather wingback. Chair the way a man looks when a late night finally pins him down. His eyes were half closed, just enough to watch. He had staged the scene with surgical care after his co-founder siphoned $3 million through a maze of shell invoices. Ethan's faith in people had crumbled into numbers and locks. He was 45, worth more than small countries, and emptier than he'd ever been. What did honesty look like when no one was watching? Did it even exist? The office door opened softly. Grace Miller stepped in, a spray bottle tucked in a caddy, rubber-soled shoes whispering over the rugs. Beside her, a 6-year-old in pink gloves peered around the room, eyes like dark marbles that caught every glint. "Lila," Grace murmured. "Remember, we don't touch." "Yes, Mama." They'd been cleaning Caldwell Dynamics at night for 2 years. Grace worked mornings at a clinic, nights in the towers of downtown, and anywhere in between. If someone needed a staircase scrubbed or a lobby polished, Lila came along during school breaks with a coloring book, a snack pack, and a gravity that made grown men set down their phones and listen. Ethan's heart thudded once when the girl noticed the open safe. She froze at the threshold, like the money was a lion asleep on warm stone. Then, small and careful, she walked toward the desk where Ethan slept. She didn't reach out. She didn't even lean. She just studied the chaos, some bands loose, some stacks cocked sideways, like a puzzle that couldn't be left unsolved. She turned, lifted her hands, and without crossing into the safe, began organizing what lay on the desk. Receipts, a few loose bills, the pens, the ledger. She made straight lines. She aligned corners. She stacked by size. "Mommy," she whispered, "Mr. Ethan's money is messy. I'm fixing the desk part, not the safe, just the desk." Like the coin jar at home, Grace's gasp was soft but sharp. "Lila, honey, don't touch what isn't ours." "I didn't, Mama. I'm only tidying the messy side so he won't be sad when he wakes up." Ethan felt a sensation he hadn't known in years, a sting at the bridge of his nose. The tightness of a throat that wants to speak truth and can't. That little thing, the child's restraint. The instinct to order what she could reach and leave what she couldn't cut through him more cleanly than any quarterly report or courtroom verdict. He let his head loll as if sleep held him. Grace finished the shelves. Lila lined up the pens by color. They left quietly, the door sighing shut. Ethan stared at the open safe, the slanted stacks, the desk that looked respectful. He stood, closed the heavy door, and pressed his forehead. To the cool steel, something had shifted. Or maybe something in him remembered the shape of a world he used to believe in. He didn't know the gesture would set off a chain reaction that would expose rot he'd ignored for too long and change lives far beyond his penthouse floor. In the weeks that followed, Ethan watched without announcing himself. Security footage, timestamps, badge logs. He hated spying, but trust he'd learned was not a policy, it was a practice. Grace worked like a metronome. Lila, when she came, did homework on a chair by the glass wall and whispered questions that made executives walking past smile and straighten their ties. He heard Grace say once, when Lila asked why she returned a wallet she had found in the lobby, "Because we return what isn't ours. Not because someone's staring. Because we're staring at ourselves." Grace never took charity. She took extra shifts. Ethan had payroll increase her hourly rate under a category review and flagged the change to HR. With a note market adjustment, it was clean, quiet, appropriate. Someone noticed. Charles Whitmore, vice president of operations, slid into Ethan's office one afternoon with a smile that never reached his eyes. He was 52, pedigreed, the son of an early investor who liked to remind rooms that his family had underwritten the company's first cloud contract. He wore old money the way some men wore cologne heavy, inescapable, and oblivious to how it made others feel. "We're bumping expenses in facilities," he said, crisp, casual. "Why are we spending more on custodial, especially that?" 1. Employee, Because she's excellent, Ethan said, keeping his tone even. Charles gave an amused exhale. Excellence comes with boundaries. These people, you give an inch well, best not to acclimate them to altitude. Ethan's jaw tightened. He said nothing. And she brings a child, Charles continued. Late evenings, around sensitive areas. Inappropriate. Liability. Safe, policy compliant, and cleared, Ethan said. Documentary proof is in HR. Charles's smile thinned. You brought me here to keep the trains on time, Ethan. I can't if the platform is a daycare. When Charles left, the air in the office felt colder. A sentence Ethan had only ever heard on the news replayed in his mind. People like her. Not these people. Not in my building. Not in my lifetime. That night, the cameras recorded Charles in the hallway. He'd stayed late. He bumped into Grace near the service elevator. Listen, he said, in a voice that made apologies sound like orders. I count things around here for a living. I see more money on your pay stub, and I don't see more work. I don't know what arrangement you think you have, but it ends. Grace looked like the floor had tilted under her feet. Sir, I don't understand. You don't need to. He said, your job is to clean and remain invisible. And get the child out of corporate corridors. This isn't a charity. Lila tucked behind her mother's leg. Peeking out with fear and confusion, Ethan watched from his office feed with the exact feeling that had once made him pay for lawyers. A white-hot, cleansing anger, not the sloppy kind, but the kind that draws precise lines and puts stakes in the ground. He had audio, he had video, he had patience. He wanted more. He called a number he hadn't dialed since the embezzlement. Alvarez. It's Caldwell, I need you. Detective Sophia Alvarez, ex-FBI, had eyes that scanned rooms like pages and a laugh like a door opening. Corporate or criminal? She asked. Both, Ethan said. Institutional racism. Abuse of power. I need proof that even a board of attorneys can't fumble. Then we'll do it like we mean it, she said. Grace's work didn't waver, but Charles's harassment escalated. On Monday, he showed up in HR with a stack of paper-fabricated write-ups alleging tardiness and policy violations. I'll need her terminated, he told Nisha Patel, HR director, who had a spine like rebar and a calm that had soothed 1,000 storms. Nisha scanned records. We track clock-ins, Mr. Whitmore. She hasn't been late in 2 years. These forms aren't ours. Records can be wrong, he said, smiling like a blade. My word should be enough. Nisha met his gaze. Your word is noted. We also follow law. By Wednesday, Charles had intercepted Grace in the parking garage. Listen carefully. He said, stepping into her path. People like you always pay for what you get. I want to know your price. Is it cash? Favors? Quiet and compliance? Grace's mouth opened, closed. Lila's hands tightened around the strap of her backpack. Don't worry, sweet pea, Grace said, without taking her eyes off Charles. Some people try to break what they can't understand. Charles chuckled. Break? I can break a career in 10 minutes. Don't bring the child's eyes into places she won't belong. That night, Alvarez spread out a file on Ethan's desk. Your VP has history, she said, tapping items with a pen. 3 prior companies. 8 formal complaints from Black and Latino employees. None reached trial. 2 closed with settlements. 1 disappeared when the employee resigned and moved states. Pattern. Humiliations, escalations, cornering in parking structures. The I'm doing you a favor threats, the you're lucky to be here lectures. It's a playbook. Why wasn't he punished? Ethan asked, though he knew. His father sits on boards, Alvarez said simply. Money is grease. A quiet squeaks. Not this time, Ethan said. Then say it with your policies, Alvarez replied. And with cameras where he doesn't think to look. Ethan approved upgrades to the security system, extra mics in blind corners, additional angles. In halls where Charles liked to hold court. On Friday, a recorded call came through. Charles to his father, Victor Whitmore, financier and an expert at cocktail parties that decided careers. Charles chuckled. Break? I can break a career in 10 minutes. Don't bring the child's eyes into places she won't belong. That night, Alvarez spread out a file on Ethan's desk. Your VP has history, she said, tapping items. A pen, 3 prior companies, 8 formal complaints from Black and Latino employees. None reached trial. 2 closed with settlements. 1 disappeared when the employee resigned and moved states. Pattern: humiliations, escalations, cornering and parking structures. The "I'm doing you a favor" threats, the "you're lucky to be here" lectures. It's a playbook. Why wasn't he punished? Ethan asked, though he knew. His father sits on boards, Alvarez said simply. Money is grease. A quiet squeaks. Not this time, Ethan said. Then say it with your policies, Alvarez replied. And with cameras where he doesn't think to look. Ethan approved upgrades to the security system, extra mics in blind corners, additional angles, in halls where Charles liked to hold court. On Friday, a recorded call came through. Charles to his father, Victor Whitmore, financier and an expert at cocktail parties that decided careers. Dad, Charles said, voice low and taut. We have a problem. The black custodian. She's being uppity. I want her gone. I need some of your legal friends to engineer an exit. Documentation, issues, death suspicion, whatever has teeth. Victor paused only long enough to be complicit. Be careful, son. I am, Charles replied. This is about principles. If we let people like that get comfortable, more like her will think the ceiling's for them. Ethan listened to the recording like a surgeon studying an x-ray. There it was. The fracture, white and bright. Alvarez's team followed money, receipts, purchases. Charles's private. Messaging groups contained what you always hope you'll never see again and know you will. He never used slurs outright on the company channels. He wasn't stupid, but the dog whistles were a chorus. Status threats. Culture fit. Neighborhood people. You know how they get. They also found a plan for the following week. A staged theft. Charles would plant a luxury watch in Grace's supply cart. Discover it on camera, call the police, and burn her reputation to ash. Bring him to the match, Ethan said, and let the city watch him burn down his own house. Alvarez's smile was grim. We'll be ready. Tuesday, 7:20 p.m. Charles picked up a brand new Audemars Piguet Royal Oak from a boutique 2 blocks away. He kept the receipt folded in his wallet under the Amex Black like a trophy. 7:55 p.m. Grace and Lila badged in. Lila waved at the night guard and showed him a sticker she'd earned at school that said, Helper. 8:02 p.m. Ethan sat in his office. Screens on. Alvarez was in a van in the garage, equipment humming. 3 investigative journalists were posted in cars along the curb, each with a pre-briefed packet and a promise. Don't publish until we say now, then publish everything. 8:10. P.M. Charles slipped the watch into Grace's cart and adjusted the microfiber cloth, like a villain straightening a bow tie. He glanced up and down the hall, didn't see any of the cameras that mattered, and walked toward the office with his face arranged into righteous concern. 8:18 p.m. Mrs. Miller. Charles announced as he entered the executive corridor with 2 guards at his heels. Routine audit. We've had reports of missing items. He stepped to the cart like a magician who already knew what was under the cup. Ah, he said, lifting the watch between finger and thumb with theatrical sorrow. How very unfortunate. This went missing yesterday from Mr. Caldwell's office. Limited edition. Very expensive. The room tilted. Grace's lips parted. I've never seen that watch in my life. Of course, Charles said, pity dripping like oil. Miracles happen, items wander into carts. Mom? Lila whispered. It's okay, baby, Grace said, eyes on. Charles, we tell the truth. Call the police, Charles told the guard, voice velvety and vicious. The door opened. Or, Ethan said, walking in with Alvarez and 3 strangers that Charles very much did not want to meet. He could hang up. Relief broke across Grace's face like a sunrise you don't want to blink at for fear it will vanish. Charles tried to smile. Perfect timing, Ethan. We've caught her. My watch? Ethan said. I've been wearing a fitness tracker for 5 years. You know that. I've never owned an O'Demmers. Charles's gaze flickered. Alvarez lifted a tablet, tapped play, and turned the screen. High-definition footage bloomed. Charles, earlier, slipping the watch under the microfiber cloth. Angle 1, swipe. Angle 2, swipe. Angle 3, where he checked the hall, his face sharp and thorough in his deceit. We've also got audio. Alvarez said mildly. Parking garage. HR. Your phone calls. The one in which you asked Daddy to build you an exit ramp. What is this? Charles snapped, but his voice had moved up half a pitch. This, said a woman with a press badge, stepping forward, is Jennifer Lee, City Ledger, Mr. Whitmore. Do you have a comment on the evidence we're reviewing of attempted frame-up, discrimination, and conspiracy to fabricate? This is private property, Charles said. You can't... It is, Ethan agreed. As is the boardroom where we're about to vote you off every committee you touch. 2 more journalists introduced themselves. Another camera light blinked awake. In his periphery, Charles saw them, the angles, the eyes, the lenses that had watched 1,000 men lie, and would replay it slowly until the city understood. Alvarez. Tapped again. A private chat exported to PDF. Jokes about culture fit. Comments about sending signals. An email to a boutique law firm with phrases like constructive discharge and documentation irregularities. The call to Victor, time-stamped and captioned. Nisha Patel walked in with Sandra Wu from legal and Harold Lin from finance. Harold held a folder in his hands the way a man holds a verdict. We're done here, Ethan said quietly. Harold? Harold's voice was steady. Per Clause 9.4 of your employment agreement, Mr. Whitmore, gross misconduct triggers immediate termination for cause. Per Section 12, any attempt to fabricate evidence against a company employee with discriminatory intent triggers a clawback. Per Section 18.2, any material act of moral turpitude triggers a forced divestment of all shares held by you and any entity in which you are a beneficiary. You can't force a liquidation, Charles said. Sweat beaded delicately at his. Hairline. Victor Whitmore's name flashed on Ethan's phone. Ethan declined the call and set the device face down. The board voted 20 minutes ago, Ethan said. Unanimous. The family trust will be bought out at a discount appropriate to reputational risk. Your father has already been informed. Sirens breathed up the avenue. The guards who'd walked in with Charles looked suddenly very interested in the carpet. Detective Harris stepped in, badge out. Charles Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to fabricate evidence, harassment, and violations of state civil rights statutes. As Harris read rights, Charles looked at Grace with a look that had always worked before, a mix of anger, entitlement, and promise of retribution. It bounced off her like a pebble thrown at a mountain. Lila tugged Ethan's sleeve. Mr. Ethan? She whispered. Is the bad man going to stop scaring my mom now? Ethan crouched so their eyes met. He will never scare her again. They watched as the cuffs clicked. As Charles, who had believed the world was a collection of rooms where his voice was the loudest, was led past the open safe he had turned into a stage and into an elevator he didn't control. On the street, the blue and red lights painted the glass of Caldwell Dynamics like a warning and a blessing. The next morning, the board met again. Nisha presented a plan, a full audit of policies, a formal statement that didn't just apologize but corrected, a set of commitments with dates and budgets attached. No more airy words, numbers and locks. Yes, but this time in service of opening doors. Ethan asked Grace to come up after her shift. She arrived in her plain shoes and work pants, hair pulled back. Looking like a woman who has been brave for so long, she forgot what rest felt like. I'm sorry, Ethan said, before he said anything else. I didn't see it. I didn't stop it sooner, Grace swallowed. You did when it counted? It will count every day, he said. If you let me show you. What do you mean? I want you on my leadership team, he said. We've been calling it HR, like it's a department that files forms. It's the heart, director of people and culture. Build the company you'd be proud to tell your daughter about. Finish the degree you started on our dime. And the child who tidied my desk and reminded me who I am. She gets the first scholarship in a program we're launching for employees' children. Grace's breath stuttered. She looked at her hands, at Lila, who had found the windowsill and was watching the city, at the man who had just turned his money into promises and his promises into plans. I don't know what to say. She whispered, "Say." "Yes," Lila said, without turning from the glass. "We have homework about courage." They laughed. The kind of laugh that releases something you didn't know you were still carrying. Grace said yes. 6 months later, the hallways at Caldwell Dynamics sounded different. Not quieter, just different. The jokes landed in safer places. The meetings had new faces. The poster in the lobby that used to list values now listed commitments. Internships from neighborhoods that never got phone calls back. Bias training designed by people who didn't need to pretend bias was a mysterious fog. Supplier contracts that routed money to Black and Latino-owned businesses. A fair chance program that offered second interviews to candidates who'd been systemically shut out. Grace wore a badge that said director. She set policies that made Grace a practice and not just a name. She finished a business degree at night and started an MBA on weekends. She learned to love spreadsheets the way she loved the clean kitchen, not for the grid, but for the way order made room for breath. Ethan stopped counting days since the embezzlement and started counting days since something better. He gave speeches. When asked, not about how great Caldwell Dynamics was, he was done with that kind of chess, but about how they had failed and then done the work. The scholarship program, named the Lila Promise, funded 5 kids the first year. Lila, 7 and talkative, drew a logo on a scrap of paper 2 hands, stacking coins neatly beside an open book. The design team refined it and then kept her original crooked lines in the corner like a signature. "You're an artist," Ethan told her. "I'm a helper," she said, and then a beat later, "also an artist." Charles Whitmore served 18 months. Not long, Tony would say, but time has texture depending on what you're used to. When he got out, the city had rearranged itself around the absence of his privilege. Companies declined to meet. His father called less, then not at all. His wife filed papers. His children adjusted their last names. A video compilation existed online, the security footage. The arrest, the news panel where journalists toasted a story that had felt, for once, like accountability and not just content. Students used the case in business school ethics classes. HR professionals used it in trainings. Charles applied for jobs that said executive in the title and got politely worded writs. He applied for jobs that said manager and got silence. He settled for a title that came with a lot and a salary smaller than a single quarter's bonus once had been. Some nights he watched the compilation video and turned the sound off as if silence could edit the facts. That was his part of the story. It would fade, eventually. Or it wouldn't. Not Ethan's business, not Grace's. Consequences were never the point. Correction was. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Michael Torres from CNN. We'd like to profile your company's transformation after the Whitmore case." "I'll do it if Grace does it," Ethan said. They filmed the lobby late on a Tuesday. Lila, in a navy jumper, ran along a bench and then remembered she was on television and sat, hands folded, angelic for 3 seconds before asking the cameraman if cords were heavy. Grace told the story the way people who have survived tell stories, plainly, without savoring the pain, without pretending the arc was inevitable. The night he planted the watch, she said, "I felt the familiar thud. That's the sound your heart makes when it understands a door is about to close." And then the door didn't. Someone jammed their foot in and said, "Not this time. That matters. Not just for me. For the janitor who will never hear those words again in this building. For my daughter who will walk into rooms that used to feel like they were lit for someone else." Ethan said his piece. He could have listed stats and savings Day often hides behind, but he talked about control. In one season of his life, he'd use it to build fortresses. In this one, he used it to make sure the drawbridge stayed down. The segment aired. He received emails from CEOs who wanted to borrow language and a few who wanted to borrow courage. He told them they couldn't borrow either. They had to do their own work. 3 years passed. On Lila's 10th birthday, the Caldwell penthouse filled with laughter and frosting. There was a cake shaped like a book. Ethan held up a paper and cleared his throat. "Lila, Grace," he said, "you changed this company's future in a way I can't quantify. So today, I'm formalizing something we've been piloting." The Jasmine, he stopped, smiled. The Lila Miller Educational Fund. 50 years of scholarships for brilliant kids from communities overlooked. Your name will be on every acceptance letter. Lila's eyes went round as planets. 50 years is longer than 5th grade. She whispered, and then launched herself at him in a hug that smelled like vanilla and crayons. Grace's eyes shone. She squeezed Ethan's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for being the kind of powerful that gives, not takes." That same afternoon, Charles waited in a grim office for a manager who Googled him in the back and returned with a face arranged into no. Charles smiled. He'd learned a new smile in the mirror, the one that said, "I understand." He didn't. Not really. Understanding requires a reckoning he had never chosen, but the city didn't ask his consent to remember. Ethan stood at a lectern at Howard University during a symposium on corporate responsibility. He didn't bring a slide deck. He brought a story. "A 6-year-old tidied my desk and left my safe alone," he said, and the audience chuckled softly. That's it. That's the whole sermon. She handled what was hers to handle. She left what wasn't. She told the truth. She didn't perform, she practiced. And I realized I had built a company that had asked too many people to perform goodness and allowed too many to practice harm. He paused. We talk about justice like it's a thunderclap. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's handcuffs under blue lights. But most of the time, justice is quieter. It's budgets. It's who sits in what chair and why. It's who gets forgiven and who gets forgotten. It's whether the person mopping your floor has a name in your mouth. He looked out over the room. He thought of the safe, the money, the way Lila's little hands had made order out of chaos without stealing a thing. Power isn't what I thought. He said, it isn't making it impossible for bad things to happen. It's making it impossible for good people to be alone when they do. The city moved. It always does. Deals got signed in corner suites. Cafes changed owners. The summer storms came early, then late. Caldwell Dynamics shipped products and released updates. That's the boring, beautiful part of change it folds into the ordinary until you can't imagine it any other way. On a Tuesday, Lila, now 11, sat in a conference room with the other scholarship kids and asked a question about compound interest that made Harold Lynn clap his hands and say, "I need you in finance by Friday." She drew a newer version of the logo, this one with a tiny sun in the corner. Grace walked past the office where she used to dust trophies. She wasn't allowed to touch and into the boardroom, where she signed policies that made sure no one else had to lower their eyes. Ethan sometimes passed the safe and paused, fingers resting against the steel. It was still full. That was his job. But the number on the ledger that made him breath. Easier these days wasn't the cash on hand figure. It was the one under scholarships dispersed. The one under employees promoted from underrepresented groups. The one under complaints resolved with accountability. He had learned to love a different kind of wealth. Once. Late, he found Lila in his office, now 12, now taller, her pink gloves replaced by a pencil behind her ear. She was lining up pens again. Old habits? He asked, smiling. Good ones. She said, "Mama says we fix what we can reach." He looked at the safe, at the city, at the world that still required vigilance and policy and courage and tenderness. Then keep reaching. He said that she did. And the man who once staged a trap to measure the world learned. From a child and her mother that real tests aren't about catching people at their worst. They're about building a place where their best can belong.